Savitri's heart fell mute. It spoke no word. A power within her answered the still voice. I am thy portion here, charged with thy work, as thou myself seated forever above. Speak to my depths, O great and deathless voice. Command, for I am here to do thy will.
Good morning. We're reading in Book 7, the Book of Yoga, Canto 2, the parable of the search for the soul. We've come to page 480, line 226. So as Savitri lay sleepless next to Satyavan, feeling the grief of his impending death, she hears a voice from the summits of her being which commands her to seek for her soul. It tells her, remember why thou camest, find out thy soul, recover thy hid self. In silence, seek God's meaning in thy depths. Then mortal nature change to the divine. Open God's door, enter into his trance. Cast thought from thee, that nimble ape of light. In his tremendous hush, stilling thy brain, his vast truth wake within, and know and see. Cast from thee sense that veils thy spirit's sight. In the enormous emptiness of thy mind, thou shalt see the Eternal's body in the world. Know him in every voice heard by thy soul. In the world's contacts, meet his single touch. All things shall fold thee into his embrace. Conquer thy heart's throbs. Let thy heart beat in God. Thy nature shall be the engine of his works. Thy voice shall house the mightiness of his word. Then shalt thou harbor my force and conquer death. And then she enters into this trance and experiences this dream vision, disclosing to her the cosmic past. So she sees being emerging out of nothingness, shaping a universe out of the inane. And she sees this development of little sensibilities arising, gathered round a small ego's pinpoint head. And then, as this development continues, and it reaches the stage of human beings, he describes it as adventuring into infinite mind space. He unfolds his wings of thought in inner air, or traveling in imagination's car, crosses the globe, journeys beneath the stars, to subtle worlds takes his ethereal course, visits the gods on life's miraculous peaks, communicates with heaven, tampers with hell. So he begins describing this inner world, the world of the inner consciousness. And then he even describes the soul seated deep within. In the secret adytum of his inmost soul, he guards the being's covered mysteries beneath the threshold, behind shadowy gates, or shut in vast cellars of inconscient sleep. And then there's this beautiful line or sentence which really describes the nature of the soul, the immaculate, divine, all wonderful, casts into the argent purity of his soul his splendor and his greatness and the light of self-creation in time's infinity, as into a sublimely mirroring glass. Man in the world's life works out the dreams of God. And then, towards the end of what we were reading last time, he begins describing the darker elements that are also there. He says, but all is there, even God's opposites. All she reveals in him that is in her. This is the force, the cryptic force. Her glories walk in him, and her darknesses. Man's house of life holds not the gods alone. There are occult shadows. There are tenebrous powers, inhabitants of life's ominous nether rooms, a shadowy world's stupendous denizens. A careless guardian of his nature's powers. This is mankind. Man harbors dangerous forces in his house. The Titan and the Fury and the Jinn lie bound in the subconscious cavern pit, and the beast grovels in his entered den. Dire mutterings rise and murmur in their drowse. And that's where we left off. So we continue now looking at these dark forces that lie hidden in the depths of the subconscious. Well, that's us who walk through life half asleep, unconscious of these darker forces that lie within us, not careful in our dealing with these forces, careless also of the forces of light that are there waiting to help us on our path, to show the way forward. Instead, we're preoccupied with the outer surfaces of life that we experience through our senses. But within, there is this wide range of beings and forces, worlds are there within our inner self. And of this, mostly, we are unconscious. So let's begin. Margaret.
Insurgent sometimes raises its huge head, a monstrous mystery lurking in life's deeps, the mystery of dark and fallen worlds, the dread visages of the adversary kings, the dreadful powers held down within his depths, become his masters or his ministers. Enormous they invade his bodily house, can act in his acts, infest his thought and life. Inferno surges into the human air and touches all with a perverting breath. Grave forces, like a thin miasma, creep, stealing through chinks in his closed mansion's doors, discoloring the walls of upper mind, in which he lives his fair and spacious life, and leave behind a stench of sin and death. Not only rise in him perverse drifts of thought and formidable formless influences, but there come presences and awful shapes. Tremendous forms and faces mount dim steps, and stare at times in his living rooms, or called up for a moment's passionate work, lay a dire customs claim upon his heart. Aroused from sleep, they can be bound no more.
Thank you. Let's pause there. It's striking how living and personal Sri Aurobindo describes this realm. I mean, we think of our subconscious usually in impersonal terms and maybe, quite deceptive in a sense of, just desires rising up or impulses arising. But Sri Aurobindo describes it as behind these forces, impersonal forces that we experience, beings behind them, stimulating those forces in us. So, insurgent sometimes raises its huge head, a monstrous mystery lurking in life's deeps. The mystery of dark and fallen worlds, the dread visages of the adversary kings. So sometimes we also maybe experience this rebelliousness against the higher truth, what we know should be done, the way to be, to live. We all have this rebellious, streak in our nature that refuses that higher light, that higher guidance, and goes its own way. Why? Where does that come from? So here he's describing it arising from the adversary kings, some great asuric beings hidden within the depths of our own being in dark and fallen worlds. This monstrous mystery lurking in life's deeps. This is the mystery also of the pain and suffering and evil in our world. The work of these adversary kings. So sometimes they can rise up. The dreadful powers held down within his depths become his masters or his ministers. Enormous, they invade his bodily house, can act in his acts, infest his thought and life. So they can invade our conscious life, our conscious thoughts, our conscious feelings, our actions. These forces rise up from deep within, these beings, and influence us, move us.
But we feel though that our deception is that we project them outside. See, and he brings it back into an inner, into our, it's in our inside. Not so much out there. But I deceive myself by saying, okay, people are perpetrators, or whatever. It's out there.
Right.
It's not me. So that's because he makes it so dramatic and definitive to bring it back home that that's us. That's not something else.
Mhm. Yeah, this inside and outside, these that borderline, I'm not sure it's really exists in some way. It's all part of one existence. And I think we'll discuss this more as we go on, but we create also our outer life. These forces also create that outer existence that reflect them. This is, in a way, goes back to that interesting sentence that I described earlier, that the immaculate, divine, all wonderful casts into the argent purity of his soul his splendor and his greatness and the light of self-creation in time's infinity as into a sublimely mirroring glass. But then he says, but all is there, even God's opposites. So we reflect, our soul kind of reflects outwardly all that is within. So we see all of these forces, these beings even, reflected outwardly in the world.
Why don't we take responsibility for the world? Why do I separate myself from it?
Yeah, all of this is within us, as you're saying. So we're not separate from the world. We're creating it. And even our mind, he'll talk about this later, our mind creates our world for us. Our perceptions, we know our perceptions of the world are largely influenced by our thoughts, by our preconceptions of what the world is like. We can see the world as beautiful, or we can see it as terrible. And it becomes that for us. It assumes that character in our life. But here he's describing these dark aspects of existence, which are there. They're there in God. God holds all of that within him, and it's reflected outwardly.
In this question also, how then we have the discernment when something is there or comes in, how to handle it. Then you have the feeling, it could be their own thoughts about it, but also the direct opposite.
Yeah, the question of how to deal with all of that is a complex issue, but
Doesn't it have to be some kind of acceptance that I feel victim, but I'm also the victimizer. So I'm the perpetrator of these things, but I'm also suffering from them at the same time. But then I have to accept that this is the condition of incarnation and make the best of it, so to speak.
yeah, has to be some acceptance of it, perhaps. But I would say that there is this Sri Aurobindo in his yoga emphasizes this distinction between the self and the soul and nature. So in nature, all of these things exist, the light and the darkness. But the self can stand back from that nature and, as Margaret suggests, can choose, can discern between the positive light aspects of the nature and the dark aspects. And it can choose to reject those dark aspects and to follow the positive ones, or the reverse. So in a sense, I think that's a key towards finding our way out. And then he suggests that this soul, the self within, has the power to do that, has the power to refuse these darker elements. But there is this necessity also, I mean, in personal terms, of understanding that, being able to watch it dispassionately, observe it as a witness, not kind of suppress it, but to see it for what it is, observe it, understand how these things arise within us, what it is in us that accepts them, these darker elements. And because something in our vital or our mind accepts these things and even welcomes them and enjoys them. So then we have to identify those parts of our being that are kind of indulging in these things, and separate from that and put kind of control over it, control of the soul. So that's what he suggests is the way out, but it's not so simple. Yeah, so he's right. That's the first step, and this transformation, as you say, it's a further step. But then I neglected, I think, perhaps the most important element that you raise with this transformation. We can't actually transform it ourselves, so we have to call in the higher divine force to transform it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that transformation has required, in a sense, the defeat of these, dreadful kings, adversary kings, the defeat of the hostile forces. But that again was the work of the divine avatars.
Doesn't the insight come when we realize that this transformation is natural, or that's the evolution that is reality? It's not a special thing or something, it's not an intervention. It's the way things are. I mean, the way the lotus comes out of the mud.
Yeah.
So explain that on the mental plane. It is the nature of reality that change or transformation is happening. That we're experiencing it in this linear way. But it has happened and it will always happen. So then we have another insight that keeps us going.
Yeah, perhaps some assurance that this evolutionary development or this blossoming of the lotus will take place. But Sri Aurobindo is presenting it in a sense here also. It's not, it's very nice to think of, look at the flowers blooming on the trees, but there are also these very dark forces that are antagonistic towards that process, and there's powers of light, and that there is a battle also going on.
That kind of battle is actually overwhelming us more than the lotuses and the birds that are singing at the moment.
I mean, yeah, it's nice to experience it in a light and free-flowing way, but often we're faced with the consequences of these darker forces. And also when one seeks that greater transformation, then these adverse forces also rise in opposition more vehemently. So there's a process going on, and nature also can take care of it, but it also kind of moves very gradually.
I just was recently so angry that I thought, when I see who's doing the big wars, they are males for possession. They said they should get incarnated 6 times as a woman and take care of children. I mean, I know it's not, but they're quite opposites in the world.
Nature needs our conscious cooperation when we are evolved into the human beings. That is also one of the messages of all these messengers. That nature, till the animal kingdom is evolving those beings unconsciously, but when it enters into the human kingdom, we are supposed to consciously cooperate with the nature to know its workings. Then only nature will succeed. It's also one of the messages of
Yeah, there's a difference between the blossoming of the flowers at the level of plants and even the aggressiveness and in animals, at the animal stage, and its life and death and development, with the human, where we consciously are participating, consciously are using our will. And so we have to, as he says, cooperate with the forces of evolution. Because we can also oppose, and many do. So we have to also face that opposition. But here he's describing how these forces creep up into our consciousness. Like gray forces, like a thin miasma creep. Miasma is like noxious vapors, corrupting influence or atmosphere, creeping, stealing through chinks or small openings in his closed mansion's doors, discoloring the walls of upper mind in which he lives his fair and specious life. That's us. We live in our mentally constructed worlds, our fair and specious life, deceptively attractive life, and leave behind a stench of sin and death. So again, not only rise in him perverse drifts of thought and formidable, formless influences, but there come presences and awful shapes, tremendous forms and faces, mount dim steps, and stare at times into his living rooms. So these beings can arise and consciously infiltrate our conscious being. Let's continue.
Afflicting the daylight and alarming night, invading at will his outer tenement, the stark gloom's gracefully dire inhabitants, mounting into God's light, all light perturb. All they have touched or seen, they make their own. In nature's basement lodge, mind's passages fill, disrupt thoughts, links, and musing sequences, break through the soul's stillness with a noise and cry. Or they call the inhabitants of the abyss, invite the instincts to forbidden joys, a laughter wake of dread demoniac mirth, and with neither right and revel shake life's floor. Impotent to quell his terrible prisoners, appalled the householder helpless sits above. Taken from him, his house is his no more. He is bound and forced, a victim of the play, or elude joys in the mad and mighty din. His nature's dangerous forces have arisen and hold at will a rebel's holiday. Aroused from the darkness where they crouched in the depths, prisoned from the sight, they can be held no more. His nature's impulses are now his lords. Once quelled or wearing spacious names and vests, infernal elements, demon powers are there.
Thank you. Let's pause. So we see a description of how these lower, darker forces within our being rise up into our conscious being, to our thoughts and feelings and actions. And that we commonly experience an inability really to control these forces. He says they invade at will his outer tenement. They can come up at will into our being. Mounting into God's light, all light perturb. All they have touched or seen, they make their own. One of the interesting things that Sri Aurobindo talks about in terms of controlling, these forces, like I was saying, and he says, you can't admit them at all, because once you just didn't allow a little bit of it to come, they push through that. They force their way into the being and then take over. I mean, Mother said also, if you just, allow, I'll just give in to this desire, it's not so bad, or I'll just do a little. But you just allow a little, and then they push through that and invade the whole scene, and then so that rejection has to be very firm. In another sense, Mother talked about controlling the vital as you would treat like this wild horse that you want to learn to ride. You have to really be firm, hold the reins very tight. You can't just, I'll just let it go. I'll just let it gallop, because it'll just, throw you off. You have to be very firm in your control of these things. Once you let it have its play, it takes over. It's very powerful, these forces.
I think that Shalavan often mentioned, or several times mentioned, that why is the mind watching the observation is so needed. So it seems the mind has the possibility to have in this control.
Yeah, even more than mind, that this kind of witness consciousness, something even deeper, the mental self, let's say, the mental Purusha.
And he said the reason, so the reason.
the reason and the mind and all that, it can put a certain amount of control, but it's also never complete.
But there's the other part that has to be carefully understood too, because as he says here, you become a victim of the play, or you go along with it, like he said, and then you're totally trapped. But the resistance to that force cannot be a stress or a fight, because then you give it energy. So I think modern psychology has demonstrated that we have to have the impartial witness. So if you fight these things,
Right.
then you're in big trouble.
Right.
Then you will go down another rabbit hole.
Yeah, Sri Aurobindo has said that a number of times too. Don't struggle with the forces like that. Quietly step back from it. Disengage from it.
Without the quiet mind, you can't.
Yeah.
He always says, without the quiet mind, you can't do yoga.
Right. That was the first thing that, this voice tells Savitri too. Silence your mind. Yeah, right. It's in that quietude of the self that one gains that power. So that's what the first thing it instructs her to do. Silence their thoughts, cast from the sense. So let's continue.
But I just asked about this word, he uses this word twice, this species life.
Yeah.
And then over here, he's got the species names, these things. So, I don't understand exactly how we're using that word.
Specious is like deceptively attractive. So, the mind creates this very nice appearance of life. It's everything very ordered, everything looks nice. But then, all these kind of dark forces can arise into that and discolor the walls.
It's a trap. Right? It's a fair and specious life.
Yeah.
And then we get over here with this, what you wear, specious names and vests.
Yeah. So those are even, we put nice names on these things. Well, it's just desire. Quite natural. Nothing to be disturbed about. Nothing to worry about. Okay, we'll continue.
Man's lower nature hides these awful guests. Their vast contagion grips sometimes man's world. An awful insurgence overpowers man's soul. In house and house the huge uprising grows. Hell's companies are loosed to do their work. Into the earthways they break out from all doors. Invade with bloodlust and the will to slay, and fill with horror and carnage God's fair world. Death and his hunters stalk a victim earth. The terrible angel smites at every door. An awful laughter mocks at the world's pain.
and massacre and torture grin at heaven. All is the prey of the destroying force. Creation rocks and tremble top and base. This evil nature housed in human hearts. A foreign inhabitant, a dangerous guest. The soul that harbors it, it can dislodge. Expel the householder, possess the house. An opposite potency contradicting God. A momentary evil's almightiness has straddled the straight path of nature's acts. It imitates the Godhead it denies, puts on his figure and assumes his face. A Manichaean creator and destroyer. This can abolish man, annul his world. But there is a guardian power, there are hands that save. Calm eyes divine regard the human scene.
Thank you. So here we see first how these forces can invade the world, really operate on this massive scale. You can think of World War II, in which most of the nations of the world were involved in war and slaughter and evil and darkness can grip the whole world. An awful insurgence overpowers man's soul. In house and house the huge uprising grows. Hell's companies are loosed to do their work. Into the earthways they break out from all doors. Always, it seems, there are some wars going on where there is this widespread bloodshed going on, this murder, killing, really evil acts. Of course, it's always even happening in the so-called, peaceful, civilized life. But it can really overcome the life of mankind, and he even says towards the end it can abolish man, annul his world. So it's a real threat. And he also refers at the end here this Manichaean creator and destroyer. So this is philosophy in which there is kind of equal powers of light and darkness, which are in opposition to each other and at war. Here he calls it creator and destroyer. But I don't think Sri Aurobindo gives it that dark force, that absoluteness that philosophy does. So he says, but there is a guardian power, there are hands that save, calm eyes divine, regard the human scene. So he suggests that this divine power is superior. And he also describes that evil, a momentary evil's almightiness. So it may that evil can become very powerful, but he calls it momentary. Also, it's something that is there for a time and ultimately is not an eternal force like the divine is, the divine force.
This Manichaean thing is interesting because Sri Aurobindo was always against this thing that matter is evil. And the Manichaean theology is that you have a religion where you deny matter because that's the problem. You only go for life. So even in traditions in India, you know, how matter was originally evil behind.
Right.
That was the Manichaean thing. And people thought that was good. That was real spirituality. You get away from matter. So he, throughout Savitri, people bring back that theme.
Yeah, somehow both are part of the divine working in Sri Aurobindo's view. Two forces necessary and in interaction with each other.
I think what for us important is to get to know this, experience this also, and then how to handle it, how to keep the faith. That even when we're hanging in this darkness, okay, the morning will come and we'll start another day. This is to handle it and how to keep the faith in the process, and also know how much negative thoughts are all around.
Yeah, I think that's part of the process of standing back from it and observing it. We have to, recognize this negative aspect of our existence and be able to see it and be able to work through it. Like B is saying, we can't just deny it or reject it. It just pretend that it doesn't exist or somehow. And we have to deal with it. We have to work with it. Ultimately, we have to transform it. But all of that with the help of the divine force, which is superior to it. We have to recognize, too, that our limited egoistic self is not really equipped to deal with it. If we're shut up into our small selves, into our specious, mental compartments, we won't be able to effectively deal with it. This last line, it's very Beautiful. Calm eyes, divine, regard the human scene. And we think of Sri Aurobindo, I think, and his eyes, and quietly observing, but also sitting in his chair in the ashram while this Second World War is going on and all of this destruction is there, and the threat of Nazism overtaking the world was real. And from his room, quietly intervening, putting his force here and there in order to stop the advance, to turn the tide of the war. Shall we continue?
All the world's possibilities in man are waiting as the tree waits in its seed. His past lives in him, it drives his future's pace, his presence acts, fashion his coming fate. The unborn gods hide in his house of life. The demons of the unknown overshadow his mind, casting their dreams into live molds of thought. The molds in which his mind builds out its world. His mind creates around him its universe. All that has been renews in him its birth. All that can be is figured in his soul. Issuing in deeds, it scores the roads of the world. Obscure to interpreting reason's guess, lines of the secret purpose of the gods. In strange directions runs the intricate plan, held back from human foresight as their end, and the far intentions of some ordering will on the order of life's arbitrary chance, finds out its settled poise and fated hour. Are surfaced watched in vain by reason's gaze, invaded by the impromptus of the unseen, helpless records, the accidents, pardon?
Records.
Yes. Helpless records the accidents of time, the involuntary turns and leaps of life. Only a little of us foresees its steps. Only a little has will and purposed pace.
Thank you. I think this is kind of a profound passage that is here and continues for some time. And one of the talks that I did is on this passage called The Psychology of Fate. So if you want to go see something a little in depth about it, you can look at that talk on YouTube. But he begins, and it describes some of the things that we were discussing earlier about the development in the sense of blossoming of a lotus versus this more intense clash of forces of darkness. Some of that is also alluded to here. It begins by describing this development, evolution of man, as like this blossoming of a tree or flower. All the world's possibilities in man are waiting as the tree waits in its seed. So all these things are there and slowly, gradually develop. His past lives in him. It drives his future's pace. His presence acts, fashion his coming fate. So this idea of development, like a seed sprouting, is there also in humanity. But it also, it brings in this sense of the past, present, and future. All is a development from the past to the present, from the present to the future. So the past drives us, and of course our past includes this inconscient beginning out of the mud. It drives his future's pace, or we could say it restrains his future's pace. The pace, the speed at which we develop, it holds us back, but it holds the process. It's emerging out of that inconscience and also its inertia that is there at the beginning. That inertia, that slowness of unwillingness to grow, to develop, to blossom. Okay, Margaret.
For me also, because I'm very connected to nature, all the world's possibility in man are waiting in the tree, waits in the seed. But also the seed is under different conditions, and they can be positive or that they can grow or not. So you have it in nature also. The surrounding or the condition where it is, where the seed is, how the weather is, always have impact on how the tree can grow itself and how it grows.
Right, the conditions in which the seed is placed is important.
But also this seed that he refers to, you see, we have such a dramatic contrast between the mud and the lotus. So you have something incredibly beautiful. This seed, of course, is the banyan seed, which is so small. And there are millions of those seeds in one little fig on the tree. And out of that comes a banyan tree, which can grow endlessly. Biggest tree ever. So it's very dramatic in a big way, because we have the lotus and the banyan, so those two very strong images are very powerful, and he uses them more than once. Which is how he weaves it through the story. And you remember how he used the seasons.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, that seed, it's so important because what's in the seed, or where does that seed come from? I mean, it comes from the divine, and it holds within itself the divine. So, but in seed form, that divinity is involved. It's still hidden. It's enclosed. It's in darkness. And out of that, though, will emerge that fullness of the lotus or the banyan. So it contains it. I mean, it's there. It's a fact of nature that we see all around us. It's a reality of things that it's so evident in a way. It's there everywhere in nature. Everything has also its past and its future development. And I mean, this also brings in the whole issue of karma and development. So the past also implies the karma, the actions that have been done by our, let's say, developing being in past lives. All of that also is influencing our present life, our future development. And at the same time, he says, his presence acts fashion his coming fate. So he also gives importance to our present. It's not just we can say, well, it's all due to past karma, there's nothing I can do. Or it's all just a play of nature and I have no responsibility. He also gives importance to that those choices that we make in the present. It's a complex look at fate and destiny. The Mother talks about it in terms of that there are different levels of it. So from one perspective, in the divine view, everything is foreseen and known, and it sees how everything will develop. But we can't take that position here in our limited mental life and view. We don't have that vision. For us, this future is being molded now by our choices. And those choices are critical and important. And we are involved at that level. That our choices may be part of the divine working, that it can see and it may know what choices we'll make. But at our level, living in the present moment, we have to decide. So that's why I call this in the talk the psychology of fate, because he's getting at this whole issue about fate and determination, but from a psychological point of view. So he's saying all of this is within us. This developing seed, this consciousness, it's all in our subliminal depths. And it's being worked out objectively in our life. What are some of the, well, actually we're out of time. So let's stop there. Maybe we can discuss this a little further next time.
Then Savitri's heart fell mute. It spoke no word. A power within her answered the still voice. I am thy portion here, charged with thy work, as thou myself seated forever above. Speak to my depths, O great and deathless voice. Command, for I am here to do thy will.
Thanks to Sri Aurobindo.